Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing my December wrap up, so talking about all of the books that I read this month, and as usual I'm going to be going from my least favourite to my most favourite reads, and the first one is a 2-star book. It's the only 2-star that I had this month, and that was Investigations of a Dog by Franz Kafka. This one had a lot of potential for me. It's basically from the perspective of a dog who's philosophizing about how dogs receive food because he kind of like doesn't understand the concept that humans exist. So I loved the concept of this book and I would love to see it done by another writer. I would love to read a book from the point of view of a dog, but I just don't like Kafka's writing in this book. Basically he kind of says a lot without really saying much at all. So while this book had a couple of funny moments, overall I just found it a bit dull. So moving on to my 3-star reads for the month. The first one was Headlands, New Stories of Anxiety, which is edited by Naomi Arnold. This is a New Zealand book. It's a collection of different sort of stories and essays by New Zealanders who deal with anxiety themselves. So the idea is just to give you kind of a perspective of what that's like. I found this to be a really emotionally draining read. It was really hard to get through just because it really puts you in the shoes of someone with anxiety, which is like not the most pleasant thing to read about, but it really highlights how subjective anxiety is and how everyone experiences it differently. As is kind of the case with anthologies like this, there were a few that stood out to me over others, some that I found really interesting. There was one piece where the person wrote about how they really enjoyed volunteering with birds. There was one about how physiotherapy can be used for anxiety. There was another piece about dealing with intrusive thoughts that I found really interesting. So overall I think it's a really important book and one that is really eye-opening, but for me I just felt like it was a bit too personal. Like I felt like I was reading all of these people's like personal diaries and it was a bit much. I think for me, dealing with this kind of subject matter, I would rather read something fictional, I think. I had one more 3-star read, which was A Glimpse of Eternity by Ian McCormack, co-written with Jenny Sharkey. This was a really interesting quick read. It was about the length of one of those like Penguin modern classics like The Investigations of a Dog. It was about that size, so it was a very quick read, very interesting. He had basically a near-death experience, or like he died and experienced what he believes to be the afterlife, and then he was basically given a second chance to live. He gets attacked by a whole bunch of jellyfish when he was diving in the ocean. It's like really scary. I just didn't find it as impactful or as like emotionally moving to read as I thought I would given the subject matter. I think I was just a little put off by the fact that at this time in his life Ian says that he was a drug user, so for me that just discredits the story a little bit, because I know that that kind of activity can lead to delusions and things like that, so it just isn't as impactful for me as that story would be from someone who wasn't doing those things at the time, I guess. Moving on to all of my 4-star reads. Firstly, I read number 7 through number 12 of the Runaways comic series, so I'm basically all caught up with this now. I think number 13 is out, or it's coming out. I don't know if I'll continue purchasing them just at the moment. I really enjoyed this, but I don't feel the need to like jump in with the subsequent editions of it yet, because this is like the end of my subscription. So I rated all of these 4 stars. Basically it's a comic book series. It's written by Rainbow Rowell and illustrated by Chris Anker, and it's about a group of teens who, some of them have superpowers sort of thing, and they're all like orphans, so they live together. I'll show you a couple of my favourite covers. There's this one, and it's like kind of Alice in Wonderland inspired, so I love that cover. And then this one I love as well. Everyone on it has purple hair, or like different colours of hair. I just think the art is amazing. So yeah, really enjoyed reading all of these. My next 4-star read was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This one I have a review up of, so I'll link that down below if you're interested, but basically it's about a girl set in the 1800s obviously, and she goes to stay with a family friend in Bath, and she's trying to make social connections and form romantic connections as well, but she's just a bit like socially awkward because she reads too many sensational kind of novels and thinks that life is like that as well, but it is not. So she gets herself into some embarrassing situations. So it's a funny little book, and you can check out my review if you want to know more about this one. I also ended up reading another Jane Austen book this month, which I also rated 4 stars, which was The Beautiful Cassandra. So this one is 6 different short stories. As you can imagine, they're very, very short. And my favourite one was the first one, called Jack and Alice. These are all pretty much stories that Jane Austen wrote just like to entertain her family when she was younger, like before she wrote her novels and stuff, and they're just like really silly, really fun. I also read another Penguin modern classic, and this is The Breakthrough by Daphne du Maurier. This one is about a man who goes to work for a mysterious like group, and it turns out that they're kind of messing with life after death. They want to make it have a purpose, and it's really creepy. So it's kind of one of those like mad scientist type stories. My final 4-star read was a non-fiction one that I saw recommended on Coffee and Bible Time, which is one of my favorite channels. I will link them down below if you want to check them out. This is a non-fiction self-help kind of book, and it's called 20 Things We'd Tell Our 20-something Selves. It's by Kelly and Peter Worrell. They're a married couple, and they wrote this basically giving advice. If they had to give advice to themselves at like 20-ish, this is what they would say. I found that it was full of brilliant, like really practical advice. They give you like actions to consider doing, as well as like questions to answer and things like that. So I really feel that this book changed my perspective. I'm definitely going to be spending more time on it, like reading and thinking about the different actions that they suggest and things like that. And yeah, the only downside to it, like the reason I gave it 4 stars not 5, was the writing style. I didn't think it was that great because it's written by the 2 different authors. For them to distinguish between who was like talking at one moment or another, they would just put their first name in brackets, and it just made it feel a bit jumbled to me. Finally, I have 2 5-star reads. The first one I was so excited about, and it's called The Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky by Mackenzie Lee. This was just a little short story that she released. If you pre-ordered the Ladies Guide to Petticoats and Piracy, you got this story free in like an ebook kind of form, and it was really, really cute. I loved it. It's just more from Monty and Percy, so they were the characters in The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. They go off on an adventure to Europe together. They're best friends. This one was just like fantastically awkward. It was really funny, and I loved it. My final 5-star read and the last book I read this month was really, really good. It was Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. Now, this is the first book in the Dark Artifices series. It's in her Shadowhunters world, so like the Mortal Instruments, all those type of books. This one is set at the Institute in LA, and it follows mostly Emma, who is about, I think she's like 17 or something like that. I expected to enjoy this book, but I didn't think I would love it as much as I did. I actually enjoyed this one probably just as much as the Infernal Devices trilogy. I loved that one. That was like a 5-star series for me as well, and this one was just as good. So I think the reason that I love it is that Cassandra Clare just writes like characters and relationships really, really well. I loved the Blackthorn family in this, so that's like the main family that lives at the Institute. It kind of reminded me of Molly Moon, which is like a series about kids that live in an orphanage, and these kids their parents were killed in like a battle years ago, so they're somewhat orphaned. They have like an uncle that lives with them, but I loved that family. They're just all so like unique, but they're like a lovely family unit together as well. And they have a brother called Mark who was taken by fairies, and I love him. He like speaks in a really odd way because he's part fae, and I love him. And all the like romantic tension in this book was just amazing as well, and it's just so quotable. Like Cassandra Clare just writes so beautiful that you just want to quote everything in this book, so I loved it. So those were all of the books that I read throughout December. If you've read any of them, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, or if you're going to be picking them up, let me know that as well. All of the books I mentioned will be linked in the info bar, so you can check them out and get your hands on them if you want to. So if you want to keep up with what I'm reading throughout January, you can friend me on Goodreads, follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll see you with another video in a couple of days. Bye.